And as we say at UWC, all protocol observed. On the back of great excitement the weekend with our national teams performing well in rugby, cricket, and hockey, we shift our focus to an equally exciting event, the 7th Research Week since 2017. So a great and warm welcome to all of you for joining us this morning. My name is Mario Smith, and I'll be chairing this first session. I'm going to introduce or hand over to Professor Julie Phillips, who is the Director of our Research and Postgraduate Development, and I'm going to hand over to her to do the official welcome. Thank you and welcome, Prof. Phillips.
Thank you, Prof. Smith, and good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the UWC Research Week of 2023. Our theme for this year's Research Week is Collaboration through Sustainable Development Goals, a multidisciplinary approach. We have therefore encouraged multidisciplinary research and collaboration, and we have asked our presenters to highlight ways in which their work has had a beneficial influence in society, as well as its potential to shape the trajectory of research and innovation in the future. Most of us are aware that the issues that humanity is currently facing in relation to climate change, loss of nature and biodiversity, inequality, health, and the economy, that is all related to the SDG 2030 agenda, is not new, and it has been expressed as early as 1987 already. So the situation is a serious one, and it is time for us as higher education institutions to think critically about our role in society and how we can act as catalysts for transition towards sustainability. In terms of research, we should encourage and support our researchers to engage in equitable and collaborative SDG-related research. As universities, we are uniquely placed to lead the cross-sectoral implementation of the SDGs, providing an invaluable source of expertise in research and education on all sectors of the SDGs, in addition to being widely considered as a neutral and influential player. Therefore, every higher education institution across the continent and the globe is likely to be engaged with the SDGs, and during this week, we will listen to the research that both staff and postgraduate students at UWC are involved with in terms of climate change, education for sustainable development, social transformation, understanding the burden of disease, sustainable urbanization, and digital technologies. So once again, welcome to our Research Week, and we are really looking forward to an exciting program. Over to you again, Prof. Smith.
Thank you, Prof. Phillips, for contextualizing our focus and our theme this week. We welcome as our keynote speaker today, Professor Michael Rowe, who is no stranger to UWC. So Professor Michael Rowe is currently an associate professor for digital innovation in the School of Health and Social Care at the University of Lincoln in the UK. He has almost 15 years of experience in the scholarship of learning and teaching, and he conducts research in the use of digital technologies in the classroom and the influence on teacher and student relationships as part of teaching and learning. His current research interests include the role of critical pedagogy in practice, as well as the increasing potential of artificial intelligence. Prof. Michael Rowe, welcome this morning, and we are really excited to hear some of the insights you have prepared to share with us. Welcome to UWC and the Research Week.
Thank you so much, Prof. Smith, and to everyone in the team for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. I'm just going to share my screen, make sure that you can all see the slides. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, you're good to go. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to focus my talk this morning on the use of AI for research. There is a lot of work being done on AI in general, so research into AI, But I'm going to focus my attention on how academics, scholars, researchers can use AI to increase their productivity. Just out of interest, I used Microsoft Image Creator, which is a generative AI, to create your own pictures. And it took me quite a long time to get the picture that is on my title slide. And the reason I bring this up is because as much as I am very positive about the potential for artificial intelligence to increase academic output, productivity, I think that there are still enormous challenges that we face. And one of those challenges is the built-in bias. So just as an example, these are just a very few of the pictures that I generated with Image Creator. And I kept on asking for a picture of an academic. And for the first kind of 15, 20 tries, it just gave me white middle-aged men. So it didn't really have this concept of an academic as being someone who might be female, who might be a person of color. And even when I was very explicit and said, can you give me a black female academic, you can see that the racial stereotypes that are built into artificial intelligence can be quite jarring. So it kind of has an idea of what a black female academic looks like. And I think it's really important to bring this up because these biases are hard-coded into artificial intelligence. And it's very difficult unless you use them a lot to understand how you can bypass those biases. And so again, just very quickly for some context, you can see that the prompt that I used to get that image, I had to be very specific and ask for a colored female academic. And even then, it took me a few attempts to get around some of the racial and gender stereotypes that are built into these systems. Anyway, so that's just some background and something interesting that maybe we can talk about afterwards. You can see that there is, if you start searching for artificial intelligence in research, you can see that there's an increasing number of papers being published. These mainly are related to the release of ChatGPT and other large language models like Claude from Anthropic and Bard from Google. We're just going to see more and more of these papers being published as people use them increasingly. The one paper I didn't include was a paper that cites ChatGPT as an author, and that is probably because I think we shouldn't be encouraging the use of language models, or rather we shouldn't be citing language models as authors. And the main reason for that is that they have no ground truth. There's no objective connection to reality. And so it's very difficult to cite ChatGPT as being a source of any information because it's impossible for us to kind of work backwards through the algorithm to find out where it got that information from. And I'll maybe touch on that idea a little bit later. So more and more papers being published around the use of ChatGPT specifically, but as other large language models are being published and refined, we're going to see more and more of these things being used in the context of research. So just a very little bit of context. This isn't a technical talk, so I won't get into the details of how these models work, but basically they're next word predictors. So they take the prompt that you give them and it uses that as a baseline from which to say, based on this word, I think the next most likely word will be this. I think that the next most likely word will be this. And it just keeps doing that for as long as you have given it in the context window. So the context window is your prompt. And some of these language models are able to take in enormous amounts of information as context. So Claude, which is a large language model from Anthropic, can take in about 1 million tokens. This basically means that you can give it the corpus of the entire Harry Potter world in all the books that have been published, and you can start querying it. You can start having a conversation with the language model about that world. So there's an enormous amount of information that you can include as background and then start talking to the model about that context. You may have heard the word hallucination. Hallucination is when the output of the language model doesn't map onto what we are expecting or what we think aligns with reality. The truth is that language models hallucinate all the time. They're making everything up all the time. It just so happens that sometimes what they make up happens to map onto what we expect and what our version of reality is. So this is what I said earlier when language models have no anchor to reality. They have no reference frame. There's no way for them to check if their output maps onto the real world. They are getting better at this, and we're seeing some models that have plugins that can query, for example, Google Scholar or a web search. But they have no concept of right and wrong. They have no ability to be able to check their response and to say whether or not it is correct. And the problem with them is that they tend to report back to you, respond in a way that makes it seem like they are conscious, like they are taking into account what you're saying, but they have no concept of what it is that they're actually talking about. And one of the challenges that this kind of leads us to is that it leads us to anthropomorphize these language models, because it says I and you and we, and it uses words that we tend to connect with other human beings. You can start to feel an affinity for these things, which can be problematic when it comes to trust. So the way that we trust things is that when we interact with other people and they map onto our expectations, we tend to trust them more. And so as language models get better at responding in a way that makes it seem like they are not necessarily conscious, but that they understand what we're saying, the tendency to trust them increases. And there's some research that's coming out now that talks about the trust that we have in language models. This is just some recent articles that I've pulled up just for people who are using language models as part of their research. And the techniques that people are using are just getting more and more sophisticated, and people are starting to do some really interesting work around using ChatGPT, for example, but other language models as well, as a type of research assistant. And that's going to be what I kind of want to encourage people to think about, is using these language models as a type of research assistant. So I'll go through a few examples of the kind of tasks we can start giving to language models. Maybe I'll just kind of back up a little bit and say that some people have a tendency to think of language models as giving them answers. And in the worst case, they think of them as giving them the answer. I think a better way to approach language models is not to come to it thinking that it's going to give you an answer, but that it's going to give you ideas. So if you think of language models as something that's really creative and that it can generate ideas rather than answers, I think they start becoming a lot more useful. So this is an example of a prompt that I gave ChatGPT. I said, I'm looking to do a literature review on blended learning and the most up-to-date research on its integration into health professions education. Now, this is a prompt I'm quite comfortable with because this is an area that I've been focusing on for a while. So I feel like I have a good understanding of what's going on in the literature. And so this is a good prompt to give, because if it lies to me, I will pick that up. So I know, I trust myself to be able to interrogate the response. Now, this is the response from ChatGPT. It very helpfully split up the research into different headings. I've taken out about half of the headings. This was only half of it. And for each one of these headings, it gave me a definition, which, in my opinion, is a really good, concise, up-to-date overview of blended learning in health professions education. So you can see it split it up in a very useful way. Now, you can imagine if instead of me saying I need help with a literature review, I said I need help with identifying a line of inquiry or a few research questions on blended learning. And you could go through this. It's quite a lot of text, probably about 2 A4 pages of ideas around a wide range of different contexts of blended learning in health professions education. And you can imagine, as a PhD student, as a master's student, someone who's maybe struggling with ideas, someone who maybe needs a little bit of guidance, sitting down and spending 10 minutes with the language model might help to surface quite a wide variety of questions that they may not be familiar with, given their kind of very novice position in the literature. I mentioned the idea of generating ideas. So this is just another prompt that I gave to ChatGPT. I'm interested in the topic of generative AI and scholarly practice. I want to do a PhD in the area. Do you have any suggestions for research? So again, this is just a very small subset of the kinds of questions that ChatGPT gave back to me. So I really liked the fact that it was talking about ethical implications of generative AI. So this is an area of interest. Because these models have no grounding in objective reality, there is an enormous amount that we could look at around ethics. how might these things impact on knowledge production and dissemination? So effects on collaboration, peer review, publishing. What challenges do scholars face in evaluating and critiquing generative AI? So these outputs are really plausible, really authoritative in how they come across and how they sound. And being able to recognize when it is wrong is going to become an increasingly important skill. And then I mentioned this idea of bias earlier. So what are the biases in the current generative AI systems? How can they be mitigated? In my experience, I'm not an expert in this, but the more you use them, the more you start being able to identify the biases, and the more sophisticated you get at creating your own prompts, the more you can mitigate the bias. But it comes with skill and practice and a critical perspective where you default to not trusting the algorithm. It's just phenomenal at summarizing and analyzing free-form text. So in terms of natural language processing, these models are incredible at getting to grips with human natural language. I took a transcript of one of my PhD focus group discussions. It was suitably anonymized. I gave that transcript to ChatGPT and said, can you summarize this and give me a list of all the emergent themes? And this is just some of the themes that it came up with. It then gave descriptions of each of these themes. And this kind of mapped on quite closely to my own analysis from when I had been doing my PhD. So again, I'm experimenting with the model, but I'm experimenting in a way that I can test its responses, where I can have a greater level of trust because I'm quite familiar with the content that I'm using to speak to it. Data analysis, again, I'm going to say understand, just for lack of a better word. They don't really understand, but let's say that they understand natural language, human natural language really well. So if you give it a corpus of text, now bearing in mind this corpus of text could be an entire PhD. So you could give it your PhD and you could have a conversation with that PhD. You can imagine a research student, a PhD student getting ready for a Viva, getting ready to submit. You take the entire copy of your PhD thesis, you upload it, and you say, tell me all the things that are wrong with this. And whether you agree with that or not, it's not to say that it can be an examiner, but, well, actually, the way that I recommend people use these language models is to think of this role, goal, and instruct. And so you give the language model a role. You say you are an external examiner in a higher education context. You're about to examine a PhD thesis in this content area. So that's your role. The goal of this interaction is for you to give me feedback on all the ways that this thesis can be improved, and then to give it an instruction. Read the entire text and highlight all the themes that are coming out. So is grammar a problem? Is structure a problem? And it can do a really good job of giving you that feedback. So this is just some examples of some of the other things that it can do. I thought I didn't go to this webinar, but this was a webinar on grant writing with Chat. We are going to see increasingly people using language models to come up to do grant writing. You can take the funding bodies grant proposal guidelines. You can take past successful applications. You can give all of this to the language model, and you can say, write a draft of a funding proposal that maps onto these requirements from the funding body using these successful applications as a structure. Now, I've never done this because this is quite a complex exercise, and I would imagine that unless you are quite sophisticated in writing grant applications, it's going to be really difficult to know whether or not the output from the model is good or bad. But this is an example of a webinar that caught my attention. I thought, wow. Now, I think increasingly we're going to see funding bodies as well that use AI to evaluate and assess applications. And so we're going to have AIs that are writing the grant applications and AIs that are evaluating them. And, I don't know what happens past that. And then lastly, I think there's a lot of interesting work being done on synthetic data generation, where language models you can say, give me 1,000 patients who have this presentation, this history. You can stratify these patients into these different levels of income and other demographic information. And language models can now start generating those patients So if you wanted to use them as a way to do focus group discussions, and again, these are getting sophisticated to the point where you can actually have conversations with each of these things. And so I'm not saying that they can replace real patients, real focus group discussions, but you can imagine using synthetic data as a way to test your instruments, as a way to do comparisons. Again, that people are doing research on the value of these kinds of interactions. And it seems to be that synthetic data generation is pretty good when we do comparisons with so-called real patients and focus groups. I know we pushed for time, so I'll just very quickly go through the rest of these. These are just some services of things that I've played around with that I have found to be very useful. This is Research Rabbit. You can give it a topic and it'll go and it'll recall a ton of papers that are published in that area. But once you've got that corpus of papers, you can start doing some interesting manipulations of that body of data. So you can start splitting them out by authors, suggested authors based on the research, the reference lists of the papers that are included in your in the corpus that you've retrieved. You can pick, for example, I've picked this one study at the top there. It pulls out all the references, it stratifies them by year. So if you think of doing a literature review and maybe just exploring a domain, like scoping reviews, I mean, this will just do your scoping review for you. So I think there's a lot of difficult administrative work and time-consuming work that I think we're going to see language models take over. This is a platform called Elicit. You can see the question that I asked at the top there, the best way to integrate programmatic assessment, blah, blah, blah. It pulls out the top 4 papers. It gives me a summary of those top 4 papers. It lists the papers underneath, and then it gives me a summary of their abstracts. And again, if this is an area that you know reasonably well, you can get a very, very quick sense of whether or not this is going to be useful for you. And so, again, if you can imagine someone who's starting out on their research journey, or if you just want a quick, give me the top 4 papers in an area, I think that this is going to be a very powerful tool. I've started playing around with this in, I think, November or December last year. This is mind-blowing. You can upload a PDF, you highlight a piece of text, and it will explain the paper to you. So you can take difficult, complex texts, highlight them, and it breaks it down into very easy to understand natural language. But more than that, I took some of the papers that I've published and I started asking it questions. So for example, this is the conversation that I was having with Explain paper. So are there any areas of clinical practice the author has neglected? So this is content that is not in the paper. And the language model is giving me responses that I didn't include in the paper that I wrote. So the other examples of how AI is being used in healthcare include diagnosis, treatment planning, and disease management. I asked for it to give me the state of the art in natural language processing. Again, this was something that I mentioned briefly in the paper. I talked about the state of the art in natural language processing, but I didn't explain what that was. It gave me a really good response. I started asking it some, maybe you might think of this as a more philosophical question. Can we use information about the past to predict the future? And so, this is stuff that isn't in the paper. So it's not drawing on information that I've presented it with. And you can have a really kind of in-depth conversation. I've experimented with this with undergraduate students. Give the undergraduate student group a research paper and say, have a conversation with the paper. It's a conceptual leap that I think we're going to have to ask people to do more and more, where we think of these things as assistants, as not quite peers, but definitely as platforms we can interact with. And this is something that I've been using in my writing a lot to get a first draft really quickly. So this is called Lex, and you can basically take a bunch of not quite random and incoherent sentences, but if I want to write a paragraph about a topic, I can write an unstructured, sloppy, really poor paragraph where I'm just literally stream of consciousness dumping ideas onto the page. then I can highlight that and say rewrite. And there's the in the comment, you can see that it's rewritten a piece of text. And then you can take that piece of text and then you can edit it so that it's in your own voice. This is a service. It's free at the moment. You can say what language models you want it to use. A feature that I really like is that you can ask it to be more or less creative. And as you shift the slider more towards the creativity side, it starts coming up with really kind of weird out there ideas. So again, as an idea generator, it works really well.
Prof. Rose, sorry, we need to start wrapping up if possible. Thank you.
I'm done. So yeah, I think that there's a lot that's going on in this area, and I think it'll be interesting to see how researchers start using these models.
Thank you, Prof. Rose. That's been really interesting and stimulating for application across research and education. I'm going to invite Professor Franz, our DVC of Research and Innovation, to join us now. She's going to speak a little bit about the week ahead. Prof. Franz, welcome and congratulations again on hosting a successful research week.
Good morning, Prof. Smith and colleagues. Are we not giving Prof. Rowe? Are there no questions for Prof. Rowe on this? His excellent presentation.
I'm just checking while you speak, Prof, on the chat to see if there's questions.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to just give an overview of the week, not really of the week. I'm going to just talk about where we have come and how far we have come. In terms of, can you see my presentation?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, so I'm basically going to just speak about how far we have come as an institution in terms of the topic that we're talking about and creating an awareness through SDGs based on UWC's values of collaboration and collegiality. Prof. Phillips very kindly introduced the topic for the week and what we are wanting to do, but I just thought it would be good for me just to give you insight as to what the institution has been doing in terms of where we have been going and what we have achieved thus far. So, you know, the SDG logo is about leaving no one behind. And we as a university, we have values which talks to collegiality and collaboration. And sometimes these values are just on paper and we don't actually unpack it in terms of what we are doing in our spaces and how we are doing this. And it was very interesting in the talk that Prof. Rowe just gave, where we was talking about AI and the fact that we're needing to engage with what is coming up, but also engaging in a way that allows for integrity and accountability to be there, but also talks to academic excellence. So in a way, he was talking to what is our values as a university and how do we integrate that into the research that we continue to do as we move forward. And so just to remind everybody, this is where we are at in terms of what we're wanting to do with this Research and Innovation Week, and to reiterate that what we are doing is to transform lives through the research that we do. And the research that we do is the knowledge production that we're currently doing. But nothing of this has an impact if it doesn't translate into our learning and teaching in terms of what we do in the classroom and how we transfer knowledge to others. But the most important part of it is for us to use the information that we generate through our research in our community engagement. So the focus is how do we move within this circle constantly to be able to create this research-led university that aims to transform lives. So our research journey and Innovation Week journey started, as you said, Mario, in 2017. And this is at a time when we started to position UWC as a research-led university. And we brought in various stakeholders to come and talk to us around how we can partner with them to drive the topics that we want to at UWC. In 2018, we started talking about becoming an engaged university and how is this engagement translating in terms of changing the lives of our nationally and around the world. And then I'm trying to move this thing around here. In 2019, we started talking about our heritage and local relevance with regional and impact and global recognition. And that was the conversation that our research week held during that time. And in 2020, we unpacked this global impact and global relevance. And you must know that in 2020, Research Week went online for the first time due to COVID. And we tried to see how we can continue to drive the agenda of making research count. And in 2021, we obviously reflected back on 2020 and how UWC contributed to fighting and understanding the COVID-19 pandemic, making sure that we stayed relevant and making sure that we had a positive contribution in moving forward. 2022, which was last year, we looked at UWC's contribution to the SDG 2030 agenda and how we were doing and what contribution in terms of research UWC was making and how were we making an impact in the societies in which we are wanting to contribute to. And this year we're talking about collaboration through sustainable development goals and a multidisciplinary approach, because we're starting to see that you cannot operate in isolation as you continue to address these wicked problems that face our society. And so how are we doing this? And so as we speak about this, I want to focus just briefly on collaboration and collegiality at UWC and how we have done this in driving SDGs. So as I mentioned earlier, we talk about knowledge production, knowledge integration, and knowledge translation. And there are various stakeholders at the various levels in terms of wanting to for us wanting to create an awareness at the different stages in terms of SDGs and what it is that we are doing through our research, through our teaching and learning, which is our education, and through our community engagement. So we as a unit, we used the Kotter's 8-step process to promote change. And I'm just going to show you briefly how we have done this within the institution with success in various pockets in terms of what we are wanting to do. So the first phase was to create the climate for change and create a sense of urgency. And we did this with our SDG in Daba, where we created a space for academics, government officials, and community to come together and start talking about how we can drive these SDGs and to highlight the global challenges as well as the local challenges that we were facing in terms of what we are needing to address with our research and how we are going to do this. We were very clear that collaboration needed to be an anchor in terms of creating this sense of urgency. And there was a need for us to have shared goals, to co-create, and to have diverse perspectives in whatever area it is that we were going to move forward and to create or to address in terms of our research that we are going to do. The second part was to obviously form a coalition. And in forming a coalition, we needed to talk with different individuals, different faculties, different researchers. We needed to come together around a common vision and a common focus. And SDGs was the vehicle that we were using for this common vision. And we did this in various ways in terms of spreading the knowledge and care and getting people to talk to these topics. We were able to involve our international partners, where we went to present what it is that we as a university is doing in order to make sure that SDGs is relevant and is being driven on different platforms in terms of what it is that we are wanting to do. And these are just pictures of what it is that we were able to present in terms of global citizenship and SDGs, and using UWC as a case study, but more importantly, getting the North to understand the importance of what the South is trying to say in terms of these agenda. And so we needed to create this vision for change, and we needed to get people to buy into it. And we realized that our faculties in our university has got the potential to drive this change and to get our voices from the South heard in terms of what it is that we do and how we do it through our interdisciplinary research. And so we moved to phase 2, where we engage and enable UWC in terms of driving this SDG agenda through the different faculties, through what we do. We communicated the vision through various webinars that was hosted, where faculty was able to share what it is that they are doing. We even allowed emerging researchers to share their take on what it is that we're wanting to do. And we also brought in the leading researchers to talk about sustainability and the impact of research. And so we started communicating the vision of UWC in terms of driving this SDG agenda that we're wanting to drive through collaboration and collegiality as we move forward. The big thing was to empower action, and we realized that we needed to address the various gaps that was existing within our system, and we used various strategies to do this. We created international awareness, where I spoke about what it is that we are needing to do, and addressing the UNESCO report in how higher education needs to become the vehicles of change for and driving the SDGs. And this also helped me position the University of the Western Cape in terms of what we were doing, because my words there were, we are living the experiences of the SDGs, and we need to share what solutions we have found to addressing some of these challenges. We have done this through capacity development workshops at various levels, in terms of communities, in terms of researchers, in terms of students, and allowing them to unpack and understand how their research contributes to SDGs and the impact they are having through promoting their research and the values of UWC in what they are doing. We were also very intentional in providing bursaries that would drive this initiative in terms of the SDGs, in terms of, for example, this is just an opportunity where we talk about sustainable agriculture, and this addresses SDG 1 and SDG 2 in terms of, and SDG 3 in terms of what it is that we are wanting to achieve. So we try to eliminate some of the barriers through providing postgraduate bursaries. Quick wins that we have achieved thus far: we hosted SASUF last year, and we're able to showcase our work and what we are doing in terms of the SDGs and how we have been doing it. We also have the Future Researcher magazine that we put out 3 times a year, and we highlight different aspects of the SDGs in terms of the impact that we are making, and in various sectors that we are highlighting. The last one was on good health and well-being, and the next one coming out is focusing on education and quality education, which we are driving at the university. Through our annual reports, we have highlighted what it is that we have achieved and what we have contributed, where we are now in terms of the midpoint, and where will we be going to in the future. So there's been various things that we have been doing in terms of the quick wins that we have been able to identify in terms of driving SDGs forward, and what it is that we are wanting to achieve here at the University of the Western Cape. So phase 3 is where we are at implementing and sustaining change. And we are talking about strategies in terms of expanding the local, the national, and international works, and improving the publications. So we are continuing to build on the change through various workshops that we are conducting. And we are also able we have taken this not only here at the University of the Western Cape, but we've taken it to University of Namibia, and we've even taken it overseas in terms of Norway. But more importantly for us, and this is where Research Week focuses, is that we have been making an impact through our research. And this is demonstrated in the impact rankings that you can see here, how in the various SDGs, University of the Western Cape has contributed and continues to contribute in a major way. We also find that we did an in-house evaluation of the projects that are registered for ethics at our university, and we can see the areas. Good health, yes, is leading goal number 3, but quality education is also areas that we are contributing in, as well as sustainable cities and communities, and peace, justice, and a strong institution. So the work that we are doing is really speaking to driving an SDG agenda here at the university. And the question that we are asking is, are we able to move this in terms of being more collegial and collaborative? So the question that I'm leaving with you for this week, as you engage on Research and Innovation Week, is, can we make collaboration, collegiality the new norm in our institution? And can we ensure that these values are reflected in our policies, our practice, our programs, our research, and our partnerships? And I thank you, Prof. Smith.
Thank you, Prof. Franz. And thank you for your flexibility, Prof. Rowe and Prof. Franz. Given that we've gone slightly over time, I opted to do the questions right at the end. Prof. Rowe, there's a question for you in the chat that I see you've responded to, but I would like you to also take the question live. The question was, in the space where students could use chat, how do you suggest educators approach the use of chat in student learning, especially when they don't have the knowledge to validate? And it's against the background of the comment about being able to become a sophisticated user depending on the knowledge you have of the area.
Yeah, I would think of it in much the same way that we expect students to become sophisticated users through interaction with peers, colleagues, more experienced others, the literature, the knowledge base. So, you know, as we expect people to become more critical in the way that they think about different research topics through their interaction with human peers, I think we adopt a similar approach with language models. So when the language model tells you something, assume that it's wrong. Assume that you need to query it and check it. It's only through that back and forth interactive process that we develop as novices. And now we just have one other thing that we interact with as part of that process. So I would say that we should not accept at face value anything that a language model gives back to us, and that everything should be checked. However, it's going to give us some creative kind of ideas that may not necessarily be coming from your human peers. So it's a good question, and I think one that is difficult to really do well.
Thank you. We have another colleague here who asked, I think you've seen the question. I'm just going to read it for the audience. My first question is, do you think that AI can academically cater for diverse users in terms of multilingualism, particularly for clientele in a country as diverse as South Africa? So I'm only going to take the first question. There are two, and we can answer the second one in the chat.
Yeah, I think another
Thanks,
great
Prof.
question. These language models are all trained on, well, they're mostly trained on English because the vast majority of content on the internet is English. And so they are far better at nuance, metaphor, analogy, the rules and syntax, vocabulary, grammar, all those things. It's much better in English. As the language that it's trained on has less visibility on the internet, so the language models are less capable in those areas. So I think it's a great question. I think if you're working in a language outside of either English or the main kind of European languages, I think your performance with ChatGPT and other language models is degraded significantly.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. And Prof, would you make the distinction between standard and non-standard versions of English and how that impacts the effectiveness of the application of language models?
I guess I don't really understand what non-standard English means.
Yeah. So there's a distinction made between models of English.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are many English first language speakers who don't speak.
Sure. Okay, right. I get it.
Yeah.
So again, it's about representation of that free-form text on the internet. So if we have people writing blogs, tweets, YouTube, wherever we have people articulating a description of the world in a language, the language model will understand the variations and dialects and different kind of inconsistencies and eccentricities. So where we see deviation from what you might call standard English, the model will be aware of that, but again, only to the extent that that is represented in free-form text on the internet.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Rowe. We can chat for a long while about this, but we do need to end off. Prof. Franz has unfortunately needed to log off earlier, so I thank all our presenters this morning, particularly Prof. Rowe. Thank you for your investment in UWC in the past and now in this format, and we look forward to having a very long and productive engagement with you around this. Thank you again.
And thank you so much for the opportunity. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. You can sign off and then join the next session. I wish you a productive week. Goodbye.